Early humans, our ancestors, ate meat not because it tasted good, but because it helped them survive. Over time, with new discoveries and changes in lifestyle, meat became an important part of our diet. Today, many people don't even consider a meal complete without it. Every year, humans consume around 66 billion chickens, 300 million cattle, 1.5 billion pigs, about 600 million sheep and goats, and an estimated 2 to 3 trillion fish worldwide. In recent years, meat consumption has also been linked to several health risks, including heart disease, cancer, and a shorter lifespan. So, is meat really that unhealthy? Biologically speaking, we eat food for three main reasons: to get energy, to provide materials for cell growth and repair, and to obtain essential molecules that our bodies can't produce on their own. Energy and structural materials mainly come from three components: fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. Protein, in particular, is crucial for repairing and maintaining the body's cells. The essential molecules include vitamins and minerals, which help our metabolic processes function properly. Meat provides most of these nutrients. It contains all the essential amino acids our body needs, along with important minerals like iron and zinc. Some nutrients, such as vitamin B12, are found almost exclusively in animal-based foods. Another advantage of meat is its high bioavailability, meaning the body can absorb and use its nutrients more easily. For example, spinach may contain more iron than meat, but that iron is absorbed more slowly and requires more energy for the body to process compared to the iron found in meat. These patterns are also seen in communities that live almost entirely on meat, like people in the Arctic regions of Canada, Greenland, and Alaska. The climate there is extremely harsh, and growing vegetables is nearly impossible. People in these areas survive by eating animals like seals, whales, fish, caribou, and walrus. They don't just eat the meat, they also eat the organs, which helps them get nutrients like vitamin C as well. So meat itself isn't necessarily dangerous, but its impact on your health depends on how it's prepared and what type of animal it comes from. Meat is basically animal muscle tissue, which is rich in nutrients, but it doesn't contain everything your body needs, so you can't rely on it alone for a balanced diet. One of the healthiest animal foods you can eat is fish. Fish are rich in polyunsaturated fatty acids like omega-3s, which help reduce the risk of cardiovascular diseases and support an anti-inflammatory immune system. That's why fish can generally be eaten regularly without much concern. The second best option is probably the most popular: chicken. Chicken is considered to have relatively low health risks, though some aspects are still debated. It contains mostly unsaturated fats, especially when eaten without the skin. However, chicken with the skin has higher levels of saturated fat. For example, fast food like fried chicken often includes the skin. These fats have been linked to high cholesterol and cardiovascular disease, although some researchers argue that high cholesterol is influenced more by genetics than diet alone. So if you want to eat meat while still being mindful of your health, chicken is a reasonable choice. Problems usually start when people consume large amounts of red meat, such as beef, lamb, and goat. Researchers suggest that a person should eat only about 23 grams of red meat per day, which is a very small portion, just a couple of bites. Large-scale meta-analysis studies also support limiting red meat intake for better long-term health. People who eat about 100 grams of red meat every day have been shown to have a 19% higher risk of diabetes, an 11% higher risk of stroke, and up to a 17% higher risk of colorectal cancer. That sounds pretty alarming, but before you start stressing out, it's important to understand how these studies were actually conducted. Most of the research on red meat and health risks comes from case control studies. That means researchers looked at people who already had certain diseases and then grouped them based on their eating habits. Naturally, people who consumed more red meat often showed higher rates of these conditions. The problem is, it's very hard to separate other factors like exercise, smoking, age, obesity, and overall lifestyle. In general, people who eat less meat tend to have healthier lifestyles overall. They usually eat more fruits and vegetables and are less likely to smoke or have other unhealthy habits. The real concern starts when we talk about processed meat. Processed meat refers to meat that has been preserved using chemicals or additives to extend shelf life and enhance flavor. Things like frozen ham, sausages, nuggets, and many packaged products fall into this category. These often contain chemicals like nitrates and nitrites, which can damage DNA in our digestive system and increase the risk of cancer. The World Health Organization reviewed around 800 studies over 20 years and concluded that processed meat has a strong link to colorectal cancer. Eating just 50 grams of processed meat daily, like frozen or packaged products, can increase cancer risk by about 18%. At this point, processed meat is considered to carry risks comparable to smoking in terms of cancer classification. It's also linked to a 50% higher risk of diabetes, a 13% higher risk of stroke, and a 42% higher risk of heart disease. Now, when we say a 50% higher risk of diabetes, it's important to understand what that actually means. For example, if your current lifetime risk is around 2%, a 50% increase would raise it to about 3%, not 50% overall. So if you eat processed meat, that 50% increase doesn't mean your risk jumps from 2% to 52%. It means 50% of 2% gets added, so your risk goes up to about 3%. That's why you don't need to panic just by seeing big numbers. Another important factor is how the animal was raised. After all, it was a living being. For example, there's a huge difference between free-range chicken and factory-farmed chicken, and the same applies to animals used for red meat. Around the world, it's very common for farm animals to be given antibiotics to prevent disease, but this can contribute to antibiotic resistance. If you consume large amounts of red meat or processed meat, studies suggest your overall risk of death could increase by around 29%. Again, that doesn't mean a huge jump. For example, if your baseline risk is 1%, it would go up to about 1.29%. At the same time, it's not entirely fair to blame meat alone for poor health. There isn't strong evidence that the essential nutrients in meat, apart from concerns around fats, have direct negative effects. And even the discussion around fats is still somewhat debated. Like most things in life, moderation is key. Many health organizations suggest that eating up to about half a kilogram, around 1 pound, of meat per week is reasonable, while keeping processed meat to a minimum. So if you eat meat 2 or 3 times a week, that's generally fine. On average, a person in Pakistan consumes about 20 to 25 kilograms of meat per year. In India, it's around 4.5 to 5 kilograms, Bangladesh 4 to 7 kilograms, Sri Lanka 6 to 8 kilograms, Nepal 10 to 11 kilograms, and Afghanistan 10 to 15 kilograms. These are just averages. Some people consume much more, so they may need to pay closer attention to their diet. Overall, meat isn't inherently unhealthy, and you don't necessarily have to become vegetarian just to improve your health. It's more about balance, quality, and how much you consume.